This week, guys, we're going to be speaking about having sex with my boss. Well, not specifically my boss, you having sex with your own bosses. I'm going to be reading out your anonymous confessions of sleeping, lying next to, bedding, hooking up with the people who tell us what to do at work. I feel like there's some real dirt in hooking up with your bosses, and I thought this would be such a good story to really find out the tea on the listeners who tune into this podcast, because honestly, you are all so varied in age and gender. So hi, welcome, love you all. Hooking up with your boss. Have you done it? Have you thought about it? Have you even done it and regretted it? These are your anonymous confessions on Sexonomic about sleeping with your boss. So let's get into some facts, because I know that we always lay down some statistics before we get into the juice of the meat or the juice of the story. To start us off with, 1 in 5 people say that they've had a crush on their boss at some point in their life. So fancying a manager is more common than people would like to admit. A UK survey found that 39% of workers have had a romantic relationship with a colleague, proving work is still one of the biggest places you can meet a partner. There is no specific official UK number for sleeping with your boss specifically, but one widely cited workplace survey found that around 28% of people said they had slept with their bosses. And also bear in mind that not everyone's going to admit it, because it is a bit of a HR nightmare. Psychologists say proximity plus shared stress creates attraction, which explains why deadlines, late nights, and post-work drinks can suddenly turn into bad decisions. So when I get these stories in, I always kind of give them little prompts and back and forth to get the bigger picture on the story. So I asked initially, what type of job were you working in and how did the saga unfold? So I was working in a bar job. I was about 22 and just had finished university. I'd been applying for various roles in my city, but essentially was working in this dive bar. Also helped that I made amazing tips. How did you know you had a crush on your boss? I had a crush on my boss pretty much immediately as I started working there. He was dark, tall, handsome, slick, and looking back now, a total fuckboy. But at the time, because we were colleagues and friendly, I didn't have that negative dynamic with him. Sure, he'd had a reputation for hooking up with female bar staff members here and there in the past, but so is life when you work behind the bar. I'm no angel. I had hooked up with a potwash boy in my last place. I asked what drew you to him. He was older, confident, always smelled amazing and expensive, and someone who knew everyone's coffee order without writing it down. Small little acts like that made me feel very, very, very attracted to him. It showed that he was paying attention. I just like that energy, you know, a provider. In the bar where I worked, people could often get a bit leery and rowdy on a weekend, and I guess people really fucked with the vibe that he was always on the side of his staff. So I asked, how did the hooking up unveil? We'd been flirting pretty much since I started working there, just in a friendly way. One day I mentioned to him I loved chicken nuggets, but especially chicken selects from McDonald's. Next week I arrived for my first shift of the week and he was on duty, so I wasn't expecting anything crazy apart from a little flirt, but he casually handed me a box of them, winked and walked off. Ooh, plot twist. From then on, it escalated. Random nuggets, Wingstop, chicken wraps, selects with dips. I think mozzarella dips were thrown in at one point, which is mad because it's not even chicken. But then there was one offering that suddenly changed things. On one shift, he bought me a full-on bucket of KFC fried chicken and handed it to me in a discreet area and said, I thought you looked stressed on your last shift. I don't want you to be tense at work. Then the next bit that happened changed the dynamic forever. There was no going back. He proceeded to pull a chicken leg out of the bucket, lift it up to my face, and told me to take a bite in a very intimate way. That opened the floodgates. At this point, I'm in my early 20s, so I thought this was the height of romance. Looking back, flowers might have been more romantic. However, I realised I was being emotionally breadcrumbed with poultry. That specific shift, there was flirty chats between serving customers, lingering eye contact, and then when we were packing up for the night, he put me on the job of polishing cutlery in the restaurant, which took long, and it was just me and him at the end, whilst the others had left. There was this weird thing in the air where you could cut the tension with a knife. I just took a leap of faith, walked up to him and snogged him and said, should we have our own little lock-in? Oh. So for those who don't know, I guess in the UK, a lock-in is like when you work in a bar and they lock everyone out, the customers, after, you know, you've shut the bar down, and the staff just have a drink. So they're having their own personal drinks. Oh no, they're having sex. Hang on. What proceeded to happen was sex all over the bar, on the counter, squatting on the floor. It was passionate, hot and filthy. Even after all of this sex had taken place, he whispered into my ear, "You're my little chicken nugget." I was really nervous and had anxiety that we'd just done all of this on CCTV, and he said, "No worries, let's go upstairs and delete the footage." So we did. He walked me to the tram stop after and said he had an amazing time. Fast forward to next week. I hadn't heard from him all week, but I didn't text myself. However, I thought on our first shift we'd have a chat about what happened. I ran my hand down his back subtly, and I kid you not, he said, "Whoa, what are you doing? This is a workplace environment. You've got to be professional." I said at the time something like, "What about last week? What happened?" And he just shrugged. I was mortified. I'd been groomed with chicken and discarded like one in a factory. I fucked my boss. I think I liked it in the moment, but I didn't like how I was treated after. You always have to remember that they're going to look after themselves before you. So even if it's an off dynamic, is that something that you want to work with? Yeah, I might have got some chicken wings and some chicken nuggets out of it, but the feeling after of him rejecting me was not very nice. That's my story about sleeping with my boss. Well, I think he sounds like a chicken, don't you? Okay, so story number 2. This is titled, "I was the boss and he was the superior. Tell me about how your sleeping with the boss story unfolded." I know when people hear I slept with my employee and instantly imagine some kind of dramatic abuse of power story, but in my experience, what unfolded was a lot more human than that. For context, about 20 years ago, I was a senior solicitor at a law firm. I was established, busy, constantly stressed, and raising my son alone. The person of interest was helping me on paperwork, assisting on a number of my cases, but in reality became someone I quickly relied on. He was sharp, dependable, ambitious, and never once tried to flatter me, which I appreciated in a male-dominated space. It can be often such a power trip to give compliments to get ahead. He wasn't intimidated by me either, which was rare. Myself and my ex-husband had broken up over that kind of stuff, along with the resentment he had towards me for working one too many hours and thinking that wasn't nice to our baby boy. Anyway, we've moved on from that. At that firm, I billed the most hours, but the sexism back then was a bit more of a thing, so of course I had my reputation and success come with the misogynistic name of Dragon Lady. Oh, that's not funny. Sorry, I laughed. But he just treated me like a person and ignored the name. Also, remember, it would have been so easy for him, a talented and rising legal star, to join the boys' club at the firm I was working at, just in order to accelerate through his career. But he always said to me he wanted to work with someone because he wanted to be mentored on his merit, not just be privileged because he has a penis. Because of that, I had a lot of respect for him. I knew he'd be an amazing lawyer because he cared about the right things and he cared about the right way of learning rather than inheriting positions. So when he was trying to satisfy clients' needs, he'd have a real why and purpose in doing so. We grew close and he'd always ask me how my son was doing. I'd remember if I'd had a difficult court date, if I looked exhausted, and he'd quietly bring me coffee without making a fuss but always keep it professional. Never once did I feel like he was angling for something as well. And one week I mentioned I was struggling with my son to get him to a football match because of work commitments. And being locked into a bitter divorce, his father wasn't willing to play ball. Simply said, I think this is the guy in the office, "I can take him if that helps." My son had met him a bunch of times at the crush we had from an early age. My son adored him. And with some convincing, I said yes. Even though I was the boss, he just had this way of calming me down. He said, "Look," insert my name, so her name, "you're deep into the case and mid-flow. You need to carry this out." He made the point of saying that we're on the same team and we all need to take the different jobs that come with that, highlighting that no job is too small or too big. Being the ones who build the most hours, we spent the most hours together, connecting and talking about the things that resonated with our whys and why we do what we do. We also laughed a lot, which didn't help us stay that professional looking back at it. And then I asked, "When did it switch for you?" It got to a point where I knew I was crossing into dangerous territory. I had feelings for him. I was the boss. People would gossip. Policies somewhat existed back then, but more in a box-ticky way. But I also knew genuine connection when I felt it. And then I asked, what's the result of what happened? Now today, he's my husband, and we have a beautiful baby girl together. Aww. He will never let me live down that I tried to transfer him to another case to avoid my feelings for him. The culmination of us admitting we have feelings for each other is when he got angry for me wanting to transfer him. And he said, look, we're going to speak about this at Friday drinks. And oh boy, did we drink. And then we pretty much never looked back after snogging. Whilst that age gap was only 4 years, of course there were whispers, and yes, people did roll their eyes. The shit HR gave us was fine. We'd do it all over again because now we have our perfect little family together. We still work in stressful jobs, but we managed to split our hours with what we're comfortable with. I'm now a partner, and he probably is going to be one too in the not so far away future. I understand why workplaces are careful now. Boundaries matter, consent matters, fairness matters. I look back to my graduate days and realise I'm never going to forget the harassment that I went through from older members of the firm when I was just starting out, so I understand why the rules are there. But I do sometimes think that modern life has made people forget that often love begins in ordinary places. At desks, in meetings, over deadlines, in the moments when you're not advertising who you are as a performance, but showing who you are organically. When people ask how we met, he loves to tell people, I slept with my boss and I knocked her up and then I got a promotion. He's silly and he's stupid, but he's my silly and stupid, and I love him. So, in summary, sleeping with your boss, it can be effective and it can bring good results, but also be conscious of the risks and the pitfalls and the optics of what it can look like. Okay, story number 3. This one's called Forgive Me Father. How did your sleeping with your boss story start? I want to clarify, I wasn't technically working with him, but we were both heavily involved in the church community. I helped run fundraising events, organise raffles, decorate for Easter, and pretended I enjoyed folding chairs after committee meetings. He was a priest. A priest! You fucked a priest. Fucking hell. Now, before anyone faints, let me say this was years after he'd stepped away from formal vows in one of those modern community leadership roles where nobody quite really knows the rules anymore. But he was still heavily involved with our local church and still a large pillar of that community. He split the role with another priest who would do the more professional stuff, and he would organise the more social event with this, also doing community outreach with underprivileged children, which definitely did pull on the heartstrings. I said, what attracted you to the priest? He was charismatic, funny, and annoyingly good looking. He also wasn't what you think a priest would be, stuffy and no fun. He played rugby for the local community and went to the local and had a drink. He kind of reminded me of Friar Fuck when Samantha from Sex and the City tries to fuck that priest or vicar or whatever he's called. Women loved him, men respected him, and pensions baked for him. However, I wasn't that interested because everyone with a vagina in that church wanted a piece of him, including the married ones, and also not to forget the AOPs. It was like fancying a celebrity, just not accessible. So how did things unfold, I asked. Well, one winter evening, we were the last two after a Christmas fair plan, and I just remember wearing my Joni jeans from Topshop. I bent over and slid the box into the other side of the room. I turned around and he was just looking at my bottom, and I caught him mid-stare. I laughed because I just thought it was very silly, and he apologised immediately and profusely and said he was so sorry if he made me uncomfortable. He just walked in and that was the first thing he saw. I told him it was fine. I really didn't mind him looking at my bottom. I kind of was hoping for it someday. He then went on to confess that he did have a crush on little old me, and if it was okay with me, he'd love to go on a date, but there was absolutely no pressure on his part. He did specify he was going to ask me before staring into the abyss at my bottom. I said yes to the date. After that, we kept on seeing each other. Coffees and dinners, going to the cinema, drinking, which is controversial because people don't always think that priests drink. I'd gone from organising bake sales to having a secret romance with the most talked about man, not just of the parish, but of the town. Everyone would talk about this hot priest, and I was the one going out with him. However, he'd not initiated sex yet, and I think that was due to his job, and he didn't want to put pressure on me or have that reputation. Still keeping our little secret, one night, when I was waiting for him to finish up from a session, I said I'm enjoying my time with him, but honestly, why has he not tried to fuck me? Or is that something he just doesn't do as part of his religion? He took my hand and took me into the back little room of the church. He lifted me onto the table. We started making out like crazy. And I realised this is when we were going to have sex. I remember him saying, I'm so happy you've given me the green light and I'm so happy to be here doing this with you. I remember thinking, how odd. What a weird way of saying things. I'm so happy that you gave me the green light and I'm so happy to be here doing this with you. If you ask me, it was slightly autistic. But as Christians, we don't judge. I sometimes look back and think, did I really give a priest a blowjob in a church? I really come over and over again in the back room near an organ. It was single-handedly the best sex I've ever had in my life. I hope God isn't going to judge us too harshly one day when we're trying to get into heaven. There was candles, there was a vibe. I had to go along with it, and so did he. It felt like a cardinal sin and very naughty. So I asked, how did things end up? Eventually people found out. I'm not sure specifically how, but let's say Wendy from Flower Arranging misses nothing. Well, guys, that has been this session of Anonymous Confessions. If you do want to submit your stories, you can with the email below. I love hearing your confessions. I always read 3 per episode and I try and pick like a different variation, but I'll start posting on the social media for your submissions as well a little bit more. Thank you for listening so much, guys, and I can't wait to see you next time.